The Easter Bunny didn't come to my house. He couldn't stand the smell of the Love Canal. Suzanne, age 9. Will I live to see 6? Jack, age 5. These quotes were scribbled on homemade cardboard signs and held by young protesters gathered at the Niagara Falls Convention Center to hear Governor Carey's speech to New York teachers on April 27, 1979. Suzanne should have been at home, surrounded by family blowing out birthday candles. It was her 9th birthday after all, but instead her family attended the speech at the convention center. Why? Because Suzanne and her 5 siblings and parents were living on top of a toxic chemical dump and it was poisoning their community. Hello, I'm Clarissa Sanders, and this is Clarissa Explains, a podcast that explores historical events and why they matter. This season, we're taking a deep dive into the history of disasters in the United States and looking at how they've left an impact on communities, places, and laws. Today, we're going to explore the Love Canal, which was a community just a few miles from Niagara Falls, and look at how it became what is considered the first federally declared man-made environmental disaster in the U.S. We'll also look at how this disaster impacted the people who called it home. In the heart of Niagara Falls, New York, sits an abandoned neighborhood. Today, little remains but cracked streets, driveways that lead to nowhere, overgrown lots, and a large section fenced off, warding off anyone thinking of trespassing. Empty streets stretch out where all but a few homes have been demolished, leaving behind only traces of the past. Once a bustling community of working-class families, this neighborhood, known as the Love Canal, got its start as a failed business venture. William T. Love came to Niagara Falls in the early 1890s with the dream of creating the perfect city of neighborhoods, community spaces, parks, and more that would span over 30,000 acres. At the heart of this project, named the Model City, was Love's proposed miles-long canal that would use the Niagara River to generate hydroelectric power and bring new industries to Niagara Falls. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Model City was held on May 23, 1894. Work began right away. In August 1894, the Buffalo Inquirer published an article that shared that 4 homes in the Model City were under construction and Love's Canal, which was surveyed many years ago, is being excavated. Each addition to the Model City was celebrated by locals with balls, speeches, and more. William Love and his Model City had captured the attention of all of New York. But work on Love's ambitious project fizzled out just as fast as it started. Just a year later, in August 1895, the Buffalo Courier headline read, "Love lying low, Model City's projector is ominously quiet." By 1897, in an article entitled Old Model City, work had completely stopped and Mr. Love was said to be digging for gold in Canada. William T. Love's perfect industrial city suffered due to loss of financial support following the Panic of 1893 and Nikola Tesla's innovations in electricity. Before the end, Love's Model City brought a post office, roads, a railroad stop, a few factories, a church, some homes, and 3,200 feet of partially dug canal to New York. The community continued to hope for the project to restart, and there were a few attempts, but on June 29, 1906, the project was officially ended when the U.S. Congress passed, quote, "an act to regulate the diversion of water from Niagara Falls," end quote. Also known as the Burton Act, this piece of legislation limited how much water could be diverted from Niagara River in order to protect Niagara Falls. This legislation was a big win for conservationists, but it did bring the end to Love's dream of the perfect industrial city. The abandoned canal became a recreational site for city residents, though, and became the perfect place to swim, boat, fish, and even ice skate in the winter. But soon, this slice of joy became a living nightmare. In 1942, ownership of the 16-acre failed canal transferred from William Love's company, Niagara Power and Development Company, to Hooker Chemical and Plastics Corporation. Hooker Chemical was founded by Elon Hooker in 1903, just a few years before the U.S. Congress enacted the Burton Act, putting the final nail in the coffin of the model city. By 1910, an article published in the Buffalo News described the company as the largest producer of caustic soda in the country and the second largest producer of bleaching powder, both products being manufactured by a secret process, and the plant worked day and night shifts. Hooker Chemical made hundreds of chemicals, including caustic soda, bleaches, pesticides, and during times of war, thionyl chloride, a helpful component when making things like mustard gas. With the business booming, Hooker needed a waste disposal area, and there just happened to be a prime location that had already been excavated nearby. For over 10 years, the Love Canal became a chemical dump site for an estimated 21,000 tons of chemicals. Countless drums of harmful toxins were trucked to the site and placed in the canal. Of the chemicals known to be there, at least 12 are known carcinogens. Once full, the canal was covered in clay, cloaking the danger that lurked below. In 1952, Hooker was approached by the local school district. They wanted to purchase the land to build a new school. Hooker declined initially, but eventually agreed to sell the land to the school board for $1 in the spring of 1953. It's important to note, though, that the agreement stated that the company could not be held liable for any damages caused by the chemicals. In fact, the deed read, "No claim, suit, action, or demand of any nature whatsoever shall ever be made by the grantee, its successors or assigns, against the grantor for injury to a person or persons, including death resulting thereon, from, or loss of, or damage to property caused by industrial wastes." Despite these warnings, the Niagara Falls School Board continued with their plans, building 99th Street School on top of the chemical dump, which opened in 1955, and then sold the neighboring property off, which was developed into working-class family homes. While the school board records indicated that they were aware of the chemicals under the school, the public was left unaware until the chemicals began making their way to the surface. Seemingly unexplainable things kept happening in the Love Canal neighborhood. Rocks spontaneously ignited. Strange chemical smells filled the air. Mysterious substances began leaking into people's basements. And people of all ages just kept getting sick. The health department, the fire department, the city, and even Hooker Chemical would be involved looking into these happenings, but somehow Niagara Falls' worst secret remained intact. By the late 1970s, though, these weird occurrences couldn't be ignored anymore, as heavy rain and snowfall beginning in 1975 brought the chemicals to the surface. In 1976, the Niagara Falls Gazette published articles letting the community know that the school and their homes were built on a chemical dump, and those chemicals were now seeping into their homes. These articles spurred action, and investigations were conducted by countless organizations, including the New York Health Department, the Niagara Falls Public Schools, U.S. Representative John J. LaFalce, and the Environmental Protection Agency. After extensive research, air quality tests, blood sample tests of residents, and more, the New York State Health Commissioner Robert Wayland declared the Love Canal a state of emergency on August 2, 1978, and ordered that the 99th Street School to close and an evacuation of pregnant women and children under the age of 2 from the immediate area. Just 5 days later, on August 7, 1978, President Jimmy Carter declared the Love Canal a federal health emergency and provided funds for the state of New York to purchase 236 homes of residents living closest to the canal and a first ring, or the first roads right next to the school. This was the first time the federal government used emergency funds for a man-made environmental disaster in American history. Residents, though, didn't sit idly by as information about their community continued to make headlines. They organized. In 1978, Lois Gibbs, a housewife and mother of 2, organized her community and established the Love Canal Homeowners Association. Gibbs and other members of the community, primarily women, worked diligently to keep the Love Canal in the news and pushed both the state of New York and the federal government for support to relocate hundreds of families who called the Love Canal home. The residents demanded action. and attention. They signed petitions, they protested, they even delivered coffins to the governor's office. In her book, Love Canal, My Story, Lois Gibbs' story recounts, we had to keep the media's interest. That was the only way we got anything done. They forced New York State to answer questions. They kept Love Canal in the consciousness. They educated the public about toxic chemical waste. One day, we decided we'd take a child's coffin and an adult coffin to the state capitol and give it to Governor Carey. It was a way of keeping us in the news. It would demonstrate our plight, and it would give us something to do. Things escalated even further on May 19, 1980, when in a move to demand federal intervention, the Love Canal Homeowners Association held 2 EPA agents captive for several hours. They urged the federal government to declare a federal emergency so that 710 more families could be moved away from the disaster. And it worked. On May 21, 1980, President Jimmy Carter declared the Love Canal a federal emergency, providing more funds for more families to flee. While Lois Gibbs is the most well-known activist, she wasn't the only one pushing for support and relocation. Many Black families and low-income families located in Griffin Park, a housing project, struggled to get media attention and support that the other parts of the neighborhood received. But they continued to speak out, inviting state and federal employees into their homes and communities to witness the impact the canal was having on their families and homes. In the end, over 900 families relocated from the Love Canal. Their homes were demolished in 1982, the school was closed and torn down, and a fence was put up. What was once a bustling community is now a vacant urban wasteland. Love Canal served as a catalyst and inspired the creation of the first legislation to address hazard waste contamination and its cleanup. In 1980, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or Superfund, was established. It created the Superfund cleanup program directed by the EPA. It also provided means to hold waste contributors accountable for remediating sites and creating a fund to use in financial emergency responses and cleanups. The Love Canal actually today is still a Superfund site that has a treatment system and is actively monitored all of the efforts to keep the public safe. While I could spend all day talking about the intricacies of the Love Canal and the role of the health department and the president and the governor, I mean, seriously, it could be volumes and volumes of books. Why does it matter? To answer that question, though, things this episode are going to get a bit personal. You know the image I talked about at the beginning of the episode? The one of the 2 children holding protest signs? I found that image in 2019 while working on a research project in grad school. I was sitting in the Niagara Falls Public Library, taking a break from the archives while the librarian was taking a lunch break. I opened my computer and began looking through the images on the University of Buffalo's website. When I saw the image, I was dumbstruck. While the archives might not have known who those children were, I did. Their names weren't listed. Others who've seen the photo instantly zeroed in on the 5-year-old boy smiling big for the camera while holding a heartbreaking sign that reads, "Will I live to see 6?" But my eyes were immediately drawn to the young girl hesitantly smiling at the camera and the date. Why? Because that young girl is my mom, Suzanne. The young boy is my Uncle Jack, and the woman barely visible in the background behind them is my grandmother, Beverly. I have heard stories about the Love Canal my entire life, often on road trips from Virginia to New York every August when we would visit for our family's annual family reunion. But it was really jarring looking through the university's website and seeing the faces of people I love staring back at me. Every year, my grandmother would make the pilgrimage back to the Love Canal with me, my mom, my brother, and whatever aunts, uncles, or cousins who decided to join us. She would walk down 101st Street where her home sat, and she would share all the positive memories she could. It felt like she was single-handedly trying to let the next generation know that while the history books and newspapers and government documents would always paint the neighborhood as a disaster, she wanted us, her family, to remember the love, the laughs, the birthdays, the Christmases, firsts, and all the other joyous moments that happened there. To be clear, my grandmother never hid or concealed what happened, but she did want us to know that that wasn't the only side of the story. For me, though, as a historian and a museum person, it was pretty heart-wrenching seeing that photo of my mother and uncle simply labeled as children. Not because the archives didn't know their names. There are thousands of photographs, newspaper articles, and other materials in museum collections. As someone who works in a museum, I know that no matter what we do, we will never know the names of all of the people in our collections, no matter how hard we try. For me, though, it was realizing that I knew a little secret looking at the photo, that I knew her name, but I also knew that it was taken on her 9th birthday. While I could share how this disaster has impacted the health and well-being of grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who've called the Love Canal home, I won't for their sake and because there are already countless articles that have covered that side of the story. But what I think isn't talked about enough is a theme that I hear over and over again, and that is that the Love Canal took a sense of community and belonging away from hundreds of people. The bedrock of their daily lives were upended, the landscape of their lives demolished, and the community that they knew was scattered across the country, never to be assembled again. To learn more about the experiences of people who lived on the Love Canal and to really examine how it impacted their families after, I'm actually joined here today with my mother, Suzanne. Hey, Mom.
Hi, Clarissa. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today.
Thanks for being here. So to get started, I'd like to take a page out of your mom's book and ask you, what are some of your favorite memories of growing up on 101st Street?
Well, there's lots of them. One is when, for my 5th birthday, my mom and dad bought me a bicycle for my birthday. And it was a beautiful red bicycle. Well, I rode it with the training wheels, and my mom said, "You need to learn how to ride this bicycle. And if you don't, I'm going to sell it." And I didn't want her to sell my new present, my new bicycle.
Talk about motivation.
Right. So my 2 older brothers, Bobby and James, taught me how to ride my bicycle. I learned very, very quickly. And I also was told you can only ride it on the sidewalk because it was dangerous to be in the road.
I mean, at 5, yeah, I kind of get that.
Yeah. So I was brave, and I decided I'm just going to go down our driveway to the road and back up the neighbor's driveway, which is a very short little distance. However, I ran into a parked car.
Oh, no.
I knew I was caught. I just knew, and I was going to get in so much trouble. So I hurried, and I got myself back up on the sidewalk, and I rode my bicycle back home. No one ever was the wiser, but I was so nervous that I was going to be caught. So I got to keep my red bicycle. I tell that story, and my brothers laugh at me because my dad worked at a junkyard, and he would bring home spare parts of bicycles, and he would put them together and fix them and all. So all of the neighborhood kids had bicycles, even if they couldn't afford one.
Wow.
But mine was new.
Of course.
It had to be. It was bright red, and Mama was going to sell it, so it had to be new.
That's a fun memory.
I remember walking to school. We lived on 101st Street, and the elementary school was 99th. And I was there for my kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And we learned how to use the emergency phone, which is a red box that sat on the street corner in case you had to call the police or the fire department. You just picked it up because we didn't have 911. And so they would bring one into the school, and we all learned how to use the phone and be able to tell them our address. We had a wonderful play kitchen in the kindergarten that I just absolutely loved, to pretend I was cooking, and have a love for cooking now as an adult. When they closed down the school, they moved us, and the school we went to was called 99th Street School at Cleveland Avenue. And it used to be an old high school. Well, it had a swimming pool. And back then, in the state of New York, you had to learn how to swim in order to graduate high school. But you couldn't start swim lessons in the school until you were in the 4th grade.
What did they do? Because 99th Street wasn't allowed to have a pool in ground because of where it was located.
They waited until they went to junior high.
Oh.
So now that we had the school that had the pool, they were going to let the 4th and 5th graders take swimming lessons. Well, I was in a combination class. It was 3rd and 4th grade class, and there were 8 of us. So the 2 3rd graders got to do all of the cool things that the fourth graders got to do. So I was able to take swim lessons as part of our PE class.
A year early.
And what was really cool is when I was growing up, we had an above ground pool for a long time until the chemicals actually ate the bottom out of it. So I went in knowing how to swim a little bit. So I thought I was all that in a bag of chips.
So other than swimming, knowing that you had a pool, what other activities did you guys do in the neighborhood for fun as kids?
We would, of course, roller skate, hopscotch. I used to pull the drywall out of the basement so we could use it for chalk. And boy, my dad was mad. We did that. We also would go ice skating at Hyde Park. And it was nothing for my mom to take a carload of kids and drop us off with a quarter, and we'd ice skate all day and get hot chocolate. We also had this little area in our backyard that we called the Black Pond. And come to find out, it was actually where the chemicals were coming up in the back.
Wow.
That would freeze over. And we'd ice skate on it, not thinking anything of it. And in the summertime, we would find the two-tailed tadpoles or the five-legged frogs or weird stuff that kids just thought was awesome that, really shouldn't be. And now we know why.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you and your neighbors who I've talked to often talk about the importance of community in the Love Canal. Can you give us examples of that and why it was so important?
Well, we grew up where our cousins were family. And so we had, if you weren't family, you spent enough time with it, you became family. One way that really stands out in my mind is during the blizzard of 77. And we ended up with 7 feet of snow. And so in order to take care of the families, the best way and the, most cost-effective way was to take all of the kids to one house. And that way the other houses could just heat enough to keep the pipes from freezing. And then everyone else would be at the other house. And the adults would take turns cooking and taking care of the kids and working outside, shoveling snow and pests to be able to get from house to house. And you have to be a community to be able to take care of each other like that. We had an elderly lady who lived next door who was not leaving her house. And so the men shoveled out her sidewalk and a path to get to her house so we could make sure that she could get help if she needed it. We took her food so we knew she was eating, and just to be able to check on her. And you have to have a strong community to be able to do that. Another thing is one of the very important things that my mom and daddy did made us do was learn how to cross the street.
I could see why that was important in a city.
Safely is the key there. So if we got caught crossing the street and not looking both ways every single time, my mom would sit on one side of the street and her best friend in the whole world sat on the opposite side of the street. And we would walk back and forth to cross the street, making sure we looked both ways each time, over and over and over again. And if you missed just one time looking both ways, you started again. That's not bad enough, but community. All of the parents would send their kids out to watch us cross the street so they could learn how to cross the street by the example of the green kids.
And it sounds like it wasn't just your parents looking out for you. It was all of the parents in the community.
Yes. There is one other thing it talked about community is we had roller skating parties, usually once a month at the local rink. And the cost was per carload.
Okay.
So my mom had a station wagon and my dad had a pickup truck. And it was nothing for them to fill the bed of that pickup truck and pack as many kids in the back end of that station wagon as they possibly could so we all could go roller skating. Thank heavens there wasn't, seatbelt laws and car seat laws at that point. But the kids were able to do things that typically they wouldn't have been able to because my parents felt that community was that important.
And it sounds like your neighbors felt that too.
Absolutely.
So, as we've already talked about on the podcast, there is a photo of you protesting on your 9th birthday. Do you remember that, or do you have any other memories of events that surrounded the Love Canal once the news got out about what was happening?
I remember making the sign, and I remember protesting, but I don't remember if it was that particular protest that I remember. But one of the things I do remember is when they closed down the elementary school, 99th Street, because it wasn't safe for us to be there and was sending us across town, they decided they needed to do health screenings for everyone who lived there. And so everyone was brought back to the elementary school to have their blood drawn and fill out questionnaires and, all these health screenings, and had people outside protesting that they were doing all of this in a building that they've already deemed not to be safe. So that was difficult, and looking back, it was a challenge that they let people do that.
Well, and that must have been hard for you. I know as a student you loved school, but you also got sick a lot and missed a lot of school, right?
I did. We lived close, so we walked to school, but usually probably 2 days a week at least, I would get sick in the morning and end up with headaches and not feeling well, and go home and I'd miss a half a day of school, just from feeling bad.
Yeah, that must have been hard. On August 7th, 1978, Jimmy Carter declared the Love Canal a disaster. How did that decision impact you and your family?
Well, at that point is when the government decided that they were going to buy homes and relocate people. Well, my dad had gotten sick. It was in the hospital. And the doctor there said, "Mr. Green, I can't tell you that the Love Canal is what's causing your problems, but if I were you, I'd get my family the hell out of there."
Wow.
So we moved. And when we moved, we left everything behind. I left all my friends. I left my school. I left family. I had an aunt and uncle who lived in the government housing on the opposite side of the school. My cousins, we grew up, we were all best friends, and I had to leave all of that behind. My family left all of that behind. My older siblings were all in high school. My sister had to graduate in Virginia after going to school for 11 years in New York. And so we lost everything. It was worse than if our house had burned down.
Which is something your family had also experienced.
Yes, they had. But, this was very devastating. And then to move 450 miles away to a very different environment. The weather was different. The setup of the neighborhoods were different. We didn't have sidewalks. We didn't have structured roads. They were country roads. There were no shoulders to walk on. There wasn't friends on both sides of you. We actually lived behind a cemetery.
Oh, no.
So it was just very different. The weather was different. Very, very different. And the fact that, again, I lost my community.
How did you all end up, 400 plus miles away in Virginia?
My dad had his brother who owned his own company in Virginia. And it's very difficult to move a family of 8 somewhere without having a job to go to. So my oldest brother and my dad left and came down to Virginia to prepare a house and a place for us and for him to get a job and get settled. So I lost my dad for 3 months and my older brother. And then we finally packed up what we had and we all moved to Virginia. And that's when I lost my best friends and my cousins and the daily life that I was used to.
So your family, our family, has had a long tradition of going back to Niagara Falls, in part because we still have family there. But every time we make that annual trip up there, we always stop and go to the Love Canal. Why is that important to you?
It's important for me to be able to share that history with my kids, with my family. It's important to show them the devastation that can be in the middle of a city. to see where I came from and why things are the way they are for me, to show them where I learned how to cross the street over and over and over again, but also to show that my community's gone. My elementary school is now just a vacant lot surrounded by a fence.
With lots of intimidating, no trespassing passing signs.
Lots and
lots.
Concrete pillars to
Yes.
keep you from getting too close. The house, not just our house, but the entire block. There are no homes left. And it's even difficult to be able to tell where the driveways were. And the only way I know where my house sat is because my mother was a darling woman and I loved her so much.
Me too.
She was kind. However, our neighbor really made her mad one time, and the neighbor was afraid of weeping willow trees.
Okay.
So my mother planted one in the backyard. And going back now, that's the only way I know where my house was, is because of the large weeping willow tree that stands. It has a little offspring of its own, but there is only those two trees on that entire city block that are weeping willows.
And they're massive now.
Massive.
Right there in the middle. So as you know, one of the goals of this podcast is to look at historical events and really examine why they matter. So I want to ask, what to you is the enduring legacy of the Love Canal from your perspective?
Well, anytime there's a devastation or a disaster or a huge event, people look at the numbers. How many people died? How many people were there? How many people protested? But they don't look at the people. And I think it's important that we look at the people that were impacted. And not was it just the medical issues that arose from the Love Canal and those chemicals, but how it impacted the fact that we lost our community.
800 homes, right?
800 homes. We lost our community. I no longer had that connection with family and friends. I go back and there is nothing of my childhood left. My school is gone. My house is gone. There's just nothing left to say this is where I grew up, except for a vacant lot and sidewalks you can't see anymore and cracked pavement. But I have to say, one of the things that's important to me is when we do go, is that I take my kids who are grown and we go to the falls. And my kids have made a joke of it that they have to go every year just to make sure they know the water is still falling.
Because that's the constant, right? Like that's the one thing that still remains, other than our family who we love dearly, who are still there. Niagara Falls is kind of the constant. And being the historian that I am, I think it's so funny that that's become our family joke, because one of the reasons that Mr. Love's kind of first project fails is because in 1906, the U.S. Congress writes an act that prevents diverting water from Niagara Falls. So it was actually threatened at one point of not continuing to fall. So I think it's funny that it's our running family joke that we have to go make sure the water's still falling. Anyway, so I wanted to ask, is there anything else that you want to add from your experience or you want people to know about the experience of living on the Love Canal?
It lets you know that life is short and you can't take for granted what you have is going to be there tomorrow. And that building those memories is more important than building a building. That those buildings aren't going to be there. And that in order to do that, community is important, but we have to be there for each other. We have to be there to support each other and realize that the government's only going to do so much for us, but it has to be the people taking care of the people.
Yeah, and I think we definitely saw that in the early parts of the Love Canal, but then we also saw it in the aftermath, where families like your uncle are helping to make sure that people have ways of getting out. But thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your story. It means so much, and it gives a little perspective of why I study history and why the history of disasters are so important to me, because we know firsthand how they impact people in their everyday life. So thank you so much for being here, Mom. I appreciate it.
I had a good time. Thank you.
So to summarize, the Love Canal is important both for the deeply personal and for the impact that it's had nationally. For me, it's important because it shaped my family and in ways who I am and still impacts us every single day. And for the national, it's important because it was the first man-made environmental disaster that was recognized by the federal government. Without that, many of those families would not have had the means to relocate to places that are safer. Yes, it destroyed a community and its scars are still very visible on the landscape. But it also served as a catalyst, leading to the creation of the Superfund Act, which provides a way for organizations to be held accountable for their hazardous waste contamination and established a program and funds to help with that cleanup. Thank you for listening to Clarissa Explains. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow and leave a review so fellow history lovers can find us. For show notes on today's episode or more information about the show, please visit our website at clarissaexplains.org. Until next time, remember, understanding history starts with asking the right questions, and we're here to explain it one story at a time.